Welcome, everybody, to Life Chronicles and Deep Dives podcast. I'm here with Coach Cornelia, all the way in Romania.
Hello and welcome back to our podcast.
Today, we've got two exciting topics to talk about. The first topic is getting to know yourself. And the second one is going to be facing and overcoming fear. Cornelia, talk to me about getting to know yourself.
Oh, how long do we have? As I was saying in our last podcast, last episode, that's a very vast topic, especially today when we are expected to belong to some boxes. As I was saying, we have to belong. We have to be put in boxes, and most of us, we don't want this, right? We want to be ourselves but still fit in the society, as we were talking the last time. And this is why we wanted to come back to the subject and discuss a little bit about how to get to know yourself. And I think it's a lifelong process, right? What do you think?
Absolutely. So, as you get older, right? You start out young, you kind of start to try things. It's like, you're trying ketchup or mustard and you figure out which one you like. And then you go, pick one and then that's your route. And then there's obviously more, options to pick after that. Not, maybe it's soy sauce or, sweet and sour and then, what ranch, I don't know. But like when you're starting out young, right? And you growing older, you're taking every experience that you have and you're learning from it. So it's not just like learning math. You're like learning whether you like it and whether you want to continue doing it, right? So and some things you learn that you don't like that you have to continue doing anyway. Like brushing your teeth, right? Nobody likes to brush their teeth when they're kids, right? But you realize you have to do it. And then when you're older, you're like, wow, I'm glad I brush my teeth every night, right? So you take all these things, you throw them in, and we'll use the same analogy I used last time. You're taking all these experiences, you're putting them in the box, you're taking experiences, taking them out of the box because they no longer serve you. And as you're doing that, you're learning about yourself, right? What I like, what I don't like, who I want to be, who I don't want to be, what kind of job I want, what kind of job I don't want, and then where I want to be, towards, the middle of my life and where I don't want to be, right? So everything kind of is a continual process and it doesn't actually stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're constantly doing it.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's also at the same time, it's sometimes can be pretty challenging to getting to know yourself. But for me, it's very important to have this awareness about yourself. At least in my society where I grew up, you didn't have this awareness about. No one was telling you to be aware of life. You were just living, going with the flow, doing whatever it comes your way, and never be aware of things that you like or not. You end up suffering because not knowing yourself, you don't know what limits to put. This is why I think that getting to know yourself is very important, with a lot of awareness about who you are, what you like, which is hard to do it when you're a child, but when you become a teenager, you have to be aware. And this is let's say the recipe for not getting into a lot of trouble as a teenager, let's say, right? Because maybe you don't like to smoke, but you're gonna smoke just because the others are doing that. And this is what helps you belong. When you're making a conscious choice, that's when things get better.
Absolutely. So you're talking about like growing up and then falling in line with, like a group of people or doing things that don't necessarily align with who the person is, right? Or, we are, right?
Yeah.
But they're still going through the process of doing those things, even though they don't align, because let's say, what do they call that? Peer pressure, right? Because of peer pressure. And
Yeah,
so,
can
go ahead.
continue if you're not making these conscious choices. This can follow you all of your life. Not being aware of your choices. You have to be aware. You have to be present in your life, in the now, and make decisions according to who you really are.
So does that take a lot of, like, how do you achieve that, right? So like, let's say we're going through life, right? And we're now, I'm at a point where I want to make a change, right? Like, I'm done fitting into the box, right? How do I get out of the box?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You can find online thousands of recipes about how to get to know yourself, but I think we have to go back to simplicity and just ask about ourselves what I like and what I don't like. For me, it's the simplest thing to get to know yourself.
So we're talking about, on a daily basis, a lot of introspection, self-reflection.
Getting through this path, it's worthy at the end, because you're gonna find yourself in the mirror. We were talking about last time about looking yourself in the mirror and say, okay, so I respect myself now. I like who I am. While if you're going with the flow and you're not aware about yourself, you will never like yourself, right? What do you think? Do you think that someone might like themselves if they are not themselves?
So, in most cases that I encounter, right, I do a lot of introspection. So, like self-reflection. I don't necessarily journal because I can recall things very, very well. I do encourage journaling for other people, but the part of it is that people, in most cases, are not self-aware, right? So, it takes a lot of work to get self-awareness, and it may not happen like instantly, right? So self-awareness, for me, right, let's say if I'm doing something, maybe the moment, let's say I say something, right, I'm very quick to speak and I'm very quick to speak up, right? But maybe after that I'm like, okay, well, oops, now I see why I said that outside, right? So that introspection, that's me knowing my own motivations, right? So as I'm learning about myself, not just likes and dislikes, but my own motivations for my behaviors, my words, and my actions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now that I've learned about those things, I'm becoming more self aware of what and why I'm doing it. And so that's part of it, right? It's all there's, I mean, the basic one is like, okay, I like this, I don't like that. The next part is, why am I doing this? Right? Okay, or why did I do that? Right? And let's say it's something that so I've encountered a situation, right, where, like I've snapped, I've been angry at people. I'm not a saint. And usually it's because I'm defending myself or somebody else that I've, been pushed to that limit to get angry, right? Um, but as I reflect on it, and I will reflect on things repeatedly, right? Okay, try to figure out, am I really angry at this person? Am I really mad, right? And as I'm doing that, I'm becoming more self-aware of like why I got angry, right? Or let's say if there's something, right? So I've reached out to people in the past that I've, you know, been angry with, and I've tried to make amends. Some went over okay, some set it to the side, and some attacked me for it. But the point is that I did the self-reflection, and now I'm becoming self-aware of who I am, what I'm doing, and I can make those changes in the future. Now, you mentioned something about limits, and I think I figured out what we're talking about here. You likes, don't likes, limits, right? So what I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about like setting personal boundaries for yourself,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Okay. Yeah. I was like, okay, limits, and maybe it's like, because you're halfway across the globe. I was like, okay, so we're talking about boundaries, right? Then that's right.
yeah,
So even especially as a person, right? Growing up, even as a kid, you're establishing boundaries for yourself and for like other people, right? About yourself, right? You're not establishing for them, you're establishing for yourself about other people, right? So I've encountered narcissistic people. I survived abuse. After that, I set boundaries that said I'm not going to interact with those kind of people, right? And if I do interact with them, it's going to be on a very specific strand of, like conversation, right? It's bare minimums. We're not doing emotions, we're not doing this, and we're not playing the game, right? So setting boundaries is important. And growing up, a lot of people have to learn that. People that are like codependent, people that are highly empathic, they may set themselves aside. So they're not really respecting themselves. They're not really holding those boundaries for themselves,
mm,
while also, like being more for somebody else, right? Been there,
yeah,
done that. I've put more effort into somebody that doesn't care about me than I did myself. Now that's changed, but it took that self-reflection, that self-awareness to realize and look back, like to look back why I was doing that. And it has to do in my childhood with abandonment trauma,
mm,
being adopted, left on a doorstep at an adoption clinic, and then like having my adoptive parents separate at age 3, my dad leave, and then like I was constantly just like seeking, and I'd put energy in, and the reason why I was putting that energy in is because I didn't want them to leave, right?
yeah,
um just repeating that cycle. Right now I've become self-aware of that through introspection.
yeah, and through suffering, Micah, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's my main problem, because I've been doing the same mistake over and over again without being self-aware, and not necessarily being self-aware, but always believing that if I'm doing the right things, they are going to see it. But usually they are not, right? So then you have to go back to yourself and see what's happening with you, and who you really are, and what you really want, and have the courage to step in and say, okay, this is my limit or my boundary, as you're saying there, over the ocean. I'm talking a lot about, or I'm thinking a lot about, the teenagers, because they are the ones that I'm working with mostly. So being a teenager is very hard to introspect, very, very hard. You're just going with the flow most of the times. You just want to belong.
Right? The teenagers want to fit in. And so what they're doing is they're not really, I mean, they may have some inkling that like what they're doing, they don't like, right? But ultimately they're going to do whatever the group is doing, right?
Yeah,
So they can fit in because they're
yeah.
not getting it at home.
Where I want to go with this, the background at home. I think the parents have a huge responsibility to help their kids make good decisions based on what's good and what's wrong, the classic what's good and what is good and what is bad, right? So the parents should be careful about this situation, because most of the teenagers are taking their informations from social media these days, not from families. And this is when you find a teenager who is somehow lost. They don't know who they are, what they want, what they like, what they don't like, and then they just go with the flow and make mistakes, or maybe feel really bad all the time. I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, and this is a huge problem with being good enough. It's the main problem of the teenagers. I'm not good enough for that girl or for that group. Um, and this is why I think the parents should be very responsible about teaching their kids to be vocal, to say what they want or what they don't want, to have a voice in the group. And what comes with this is that you get respect from the others, right? When you have a voice, when you have your own opinion, and having this respect and not stepping on yourself, then you go in the mirror and say, okay, I respected myself, so I feel good about myself. I don't have that really bad feeling all the time that I'm not good enough, you know?
Right.
How do you think that someone can get to know themselves?
So that's a long process. Like we talked about, it starts at young, childhood, and as soon as you can think for yourself and you've got like an autonomous, thought process, you start to get to know who you are, right? So we talked about liking ketchup and mustard, and then like, let's say you pick ketchup, and then that opens up other doors, but you don't like mustard, so you're not going down that path, right? That journey.
Yeah.
We've talked about how introspection and learning about motivations, behaviors, and actions, and how those things internally affect the outside world. And we kind of talked on that. But that's mainly how you really focus on getting to know yourself, is finding out what your passions are, what you like, what you don't like. And you focus your energy towards things that you like to do, and things that like are people or places and that you want to go, and people that you want to be around, and you put your energy there. You may have to do things that you don't like, but now that you don't like them, you can know that about yourself, right? You know that you don't like something,
You
right? It
can,
doesn't mean that you're going to have to be stuck with it,
yeah,
right?
you can accept the compromise, yeah, from time to
Right.
time. Yeah.
Um, Other than that, once you start to know what you like and don't like, now we're interacting with an environment. I like water rather than Gatorade. So I choose water, right? Now, why do I like water better than Gatorade? Well, uh, I like the way it looks, right? And we start deep diving. We start asking ourselves, right? And it's usually the W questions.
Mm,
Why?
yeah.
Where? What? Right? So when I start to look at a choice or a decision in the outside environment, let's skip the water thing for now. But like, let's say if I go and I'm interacting with somebody, and in this case, it's a positive interaction, right? Why was it positive? Okay, well, I have positive feelings towards this person. Okay, so why do I have positive feelings, right? Peel back another layer of the onion, and you're like, okay, well, I like interacting with this person. This person's kind. This person's, whatever. And it's mutually beneficial for me to engage with this person. And I'm not saying that everything has to be that way, but what the questions I'm asking and the responses I'm giving on this podcast are essentially how you get to know yourself, right? We're talking about stuff we like. Now we're talking about a person, right? So we're interacting. Why do we like them? Well, I mean, we can even dive down deeper. Why do I like ketchup? Why do I like this person? Why do I like to go to this place? Well, because when I go there, and if we really dive into it, we can look at it. It releases, like good feeling chemicals, right? It's a good experience. That's getting to know yourself. Okay, I go to this place, I get a good experience, right? It releases dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin into the brain, right? Because you like it, right? And now, because of how that works, right, you will be encouraged to relive that experience or have an experience similar to that. And that's part of getting to know yourself, is recognizing down to that level why those interactions, people, places, things resonate with you, right? Some people like to do yoga rather than workout. Okay. Both ultimately have the same end goal in modern times, right? Health, fitness, wellness, and in some cases, spirituality for the working out part. But in most aspects, they're the same end goal. It's just that people are doing two different things because they know within themselves that they like to do those things, right? So you touched on boundaries, limits, right? Setting those limits for interacting with people that I don't like, right? Um, Knowing why I don't like them. Maybe I've had a bad experience with them, but it also comes down to more primitive things, right? Their body language, their micro expressions, how they interact with me, how they treat me, right? So it's like it's a swirling of all of these components yield, let's say, a negative response, right? Now I know within myself that I need to set boundaries for how I'm interacting with this person, right?
Yeah.
Let's say if somebody, let's use Charlie Brown for an example. It's a cartoon, and there's a sequence in it where the female character, and I don't remember her name because it's been a long time, but she's holding the football, and then the other character runs at the football, and every time he runs at the football, she moves it. Um, he isn't learning from that experience. Now, in the cartoon, it's because she likes him and she's not telling him. But in real life, if somebody's constantly doing something negative to you, you learn to set a boundary to not engage with that individual, right? Because it's a negative experience. You have written several books. You're working on several books about getting to know yourself. Tell us about those books.
Yeah, it all comes down on what you were saying earlier about what you like and what you don't like. So what I feel is from the teenagers, it's the world is a very complicated place, and I thought maybe I could simplify it a little bit, because we have so many recipes for getting to know yourself, be happy in life, and so on, with thousands of steps and a lot of things that if you're not doing those things, you start to feel bad about yourself, right? So I've been thinking about this and tried to simplify a little bit. So this is how I came up with two books for a start. One is called What I Love, and the other one is called What I Hate. And there are something like journals, let's say. Somehow I've been thinking about some categories and put myself there, what I like and what I hate about those categories. For example, what I love about nature, or what I hate about nature, what I love about food, what I hate about food. And this comes also with relationships and love and hate and so on, everything you can think about. And then at the end of the books, you have your own safe space. You can put down what you like or what you hate. And when you finish completing these two journals, you can say that you know yourself a little bit better, and you can come with those boundaries in different situations. So writing down, it's the first thing that makes you aware of something, right? You just write it down, and your brain can relate with what you've been writing down, making it much simpler for, at least for a start. I want to know myself. What do I start with? These things. And then we can continue with some more complicated things, for example, like you were saying, deep dives, introspection, and so on.
So you've got two different workbooks, one and they're complete opposite directions. So you got on one side what you love, the other side is what you hate.
Yeah.
And between those two books, these two workbooks, the teenager or whoever's working on it doesn't have to be limited to a teenager. So like these individuals, they can then learn about themselves. And you're saying it'll have writing prompts, it'll have personal experiences of yours, and you're just be allowing them to take that time for each different category
Yeah.
to say I like this, I don't like that, right?
Yeah. And while I was doing my part, because I wanted to share, for example, what I love or what I hate, I made small introspections on why I like this or why I hate that. very small introspections, but everyone who's doing it can just write as much as they want. So I think it's a very beautiful process. At least for me, it was very interesting because, and for my friends, because I've asked some friends to do the same, and that's answer me some of this what I love and what I hate questions, and they said I thought it's gonna be easier, but it was not that easy to really stay and think about what I hate about food, for example. We all know that we hate something, but if you have to think about 10 things you hate about food and why you hate them, like you're saying about mustard or ketchup and so on, you have to go a little bit deeper and see uh, what
What
you
it
like,
is.
what it is, why is that, and so on. When we feel, when we smell some smells, how do you say it? When we smell smells,
Right? Yeah. I guess that's
smells
it.
can bring us memories from our childhood, right? So when you deep dive in those things, you think about your grandmother maybe, or your uncle, or your cousin, whatever, your mom, and so on. So you can discover very many interesting things, and you can have a lot of fun as well.
So, I mean, we're talking about these workbooks, right? So we're not just talking about like surface level, right? So like you've got tiers, and we're talking about peeling back onions, layers of onion, just to get down to the core, what they like, what they don't like, and why it is that way for them, right? And this book is generally designed to help teenagers. That's the thought. Anybody can do it, but it's more for teenagers because you work with them.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to do anything about it. I mean, if you want to put up some work and try to dive deeper, it's great. If you don't, it's great as well. It's, yeah. So it's up to the person how far they want to go into these categories and introspect on the topic. It's I think
Because
it should be about being something fun and relaxing, just getting to know yourself, and then you can come up with those boundaries. This is why I tie so much these boundaries. I mean, I see it like a circle. When you don't know yourself, you don't have boundaries, and you go to a lot of through a lot of pain. If you start to get to know yourself, you can set up some boundaries, and then maybe you won't hurt that much, right?
yes, the life experience, right? And everybody goes through it at a different pace and at a different level, and your books will definitely help them introspect, because ultimately what it comes down to is self-reflection, introspection, and then you don't particularly journal, but you've created a way for your clients or prospective buyers of your book to really introspect and deep dive, if they want, to the core of who they are.
I hope it's gonna be a very good experience for everyone who buys the books.
Awesome. All right, so let's move into our second topic for this podcast, and that is going to be facing and overcoming fear. And it's a big topic, and it kind of touches back into the first one for today, but it in itself is its own beast. Facing fear is a daunting task, right? So, and not everybody has the same fears. Everyone's got, different reactions to things. And some people don't have any fear, right? Not necessarily that they are fearless, but they lack the uh, response from the body to feel the fear that they should be feeling, right? So, facing fear. For me, facing fear is acknowledging that something is there, but then finding a way to work through it, around it, under it, kind of like water passing through, the rocks
Mm.
in a stream, right? So when I encounter an obstacle that triggers a fear response within me, I have one of two options. I can either face it or run away.
Mm.
Almost every time I will face it. I will work through whatever situation is occurring. I will tackle it head on, right?
Why, Micah? Why do you think that you're choosing this path of confronting the fear? What's your outcome
uh,
from? What's your take from it?
well, I get to learn. I get to learn. I gain something from that experience, right? But I also will learn to, or I will take that experience, right? And as I do that experience and I engage with it more and more, the less I fear it,
Mm.
right? Um, so let's say if it's rock climbing, right? I love to rock climb, and but I have a fear of heights at the same time, right? So it's not necessarily that I have a fear of being high or climbing. Usually going up isn't a problem for me. I'm really good at going up. The problem is when I'm coming down, it feels like I'm going to just magically fly off of the side of the cliff or something like that. Like I'm looking, it just feels like it is. So my body, and this is a more of a recent development because of a lower back injury, which renders it almost unable to move from my lumbar to my sacrum. But with that, I still do it, right? So I'll climb up, I'll climb fast, and
Mm.
then when I get to the top, and then on my way down, it just feels like I'm going to just fly away from the cliff or fly away from, if it's really steep stairs, which, it feels like I'm just going to just levitate away from that. But I still go down the stairs. I still climb down that cliff. It just may take me a little bit longer. And I don't necessarily know why that happens, but all I know is that if I don't get down, right, nobody else is getting me down, right? So I go through the process. I recognize that there's an obstacle in front of me, that my body's initiated like a fear response. Um, and I have two choices. I can quit, go back the other way, and get stuck at the top, or I can continue down.
How does it make you feel?
So that is the benefit of facing the fear, is that like once you've conquered it, once you've made it through it, right? It may not just happen at like one occurrence, right? You may have to do multiple attempts or multiple events of that particular experience in order to really harness that. But because I've completed it, I
Mm.
now feel a sense of accomplishment, right? Like
Yeah.
I've kind of like the David and Goliath, right? Small guy, big giant. Small guy takes down big giant, right?
Mm.
Um, in personal interactions with people, right? I don't really register fear that way. So like my fear is just magically flying off of a mountain. And then like my imagination, right? So you ever swimming in the ocean, and then you see something and you're just like, oh, what was that? And then it's like this huge monster that just like comes up and like engulfs, half the ocean at the same, right? But it's not there. Your mind's just playing tricks on you, but you still have to keep swimming in the ocean anyway, because,
Mm.
right? When it comes to people, right, I don't have that fear response. So, or animals, right? So like I'm really not afraid of people or animals in that aspect, right? But I am afraid of magically floating off of the side of a mountain, right? So when I engage with people, right, because I don't have that fear response, I just engage with them as myself, or I don't engage with them. So, for instance, if I am, uh, let's say, I need to be someplace and I know somebody there doesn't like me, I'm not afraid of them, right?
Mm,
Interacting, right? And maybe it's just because I've faced that down so many times. Maybe it's because I've introspected about myself, and but also I know I can handle myself in that
mm,
in
yeah.
situation, right? So I just go through that situation, um, and it's like it's maybe it's just I've done it so many times, right? I've learned from my past experiences that I've got myself during those situations, right? But it really doesn't trigger like a fear response in me. There's no rapid heartbeat or anything like that. Even with like animals, right? I've swam in the ocean and encountered sharks. Didn't get a fear response then, right? This was
What
when
did
I was in the Navy.
what you do
Go
when you
ahead.
meet with what you do when you met the sharks?
Oh, I just sat there, right? And one got a little bit close, and I booped it on the nose, and that was that. But like, I mean, we're not talking like great white shark here. We're a little. We're talking about a smaller shark, but it was still had teeth, right?
Mm,
Didn't trigger the response, right? And I think it's because it wasn't part of my imagination. Remember, I said that like my imagination can throw that fear response up, but I could actually see what this was. It's just a shark, just a fish, right? So I just interacted with it, fearless. And maybe animals can sense whether you're afraid of them or not. And
for
so I
sure.
don't really have any problems with animals, like ferocious dogs or aggressive dogs. I don't really have fear towards them. um, I've interacted with narcissistic and sociopathic people, and I don't have fear towards them. I just engage with them, or am around them without engaging with them, just
Isn't it
as is.
isn't it about having or not control, but when you kind of know what's going on, so you kind of know how things are gonna go, and you feel that you have control on the situation. Whilst when you're going off the cliff, you don't know what's gonna happen because you've never flown from there. But if you would fly one day, maybe with a parachute, whatever, and you
Right.
goes right, maybe you will have control over this situation as well. So
I would rather jump out of an airplane with a parachute than ride in a roller coaster. Okay. Um, and you're right, because of the control, right, of the parachute. Like, let's say if I am on a cliff, right? I'm on the top of a cliff, and then there's like a little chute where I can do, like a paraglide off of, and pop a parachute and go, right? I would feel comfortable in that situation,
mm,
right? With that parachute, right? And with that, because I would know that I'm being pulled off of the mountain, off the
mm,
cliff, you know, um,
yeah,
with that with that there. So ultimately facing that fear would come down to knowing the controls, right? So knowing what's going to happen, being able to predict and know what's going to happen. Whereas
mm,
when I'm climbing down the side of a mountain, or let's say my imagination is, tricking me in the middle of the ocean when I'm on a swim, it's like, okay, well, now there's some unknowns there. So knowing in this case helps with facing that fear.
yeah, that's
Talk to me a little bit about, overcoming fear and facing it for you. What are your experiences and how do you do it?
I mean, I have anxiety. Uh, I mean, since 18 years ago. With anxiety, you get to have thousands of fears, all kinds of fears. You can't realize what's happening. You just have, like, imagine like a lot of bees coming over you. This is how it is in anxiety with fears. This and this, and even things that you've never been scared of before, they can they can become scary. And in Romania, we didn't have a lot of information about anxiety. All of a sudden, having so many fears, I was afraid to go out by myself. I was afraid to eat a lot of things that I used to eat before. I was afraid to do many things I used to do before. Once I realized that it's anxiety, knowing what it is and going into therapy and realizing, so now I know what this is. It's anxiety. So anxiety comes with fears. So it's not real. For me, this was the moment. It's not real. It's just my mind playing tricks. Living with this, it takes maybe 2 or 3 times more energy than a normal person that doesn't have anxiety to, let's say, jump in the car and go somewhere, being afraid of going on the road, but it takes a lot of energy. But it's extremely, extremely impressive, the feeling when you get to the end of the destination and you've done it. I will never allow my fears to make me not living my life, not feeling great about what I'm doing, even though. So I decided I'm gonna ignore the fear. I'm afraid to eat peanuts because I'm afraid that I'm gonna have an allergy or something. But I'm still eating the peanuts, right? I'm afraid to drive outside the city, but I'm still driving. I mean, we came with a car from Denmark to Romania, maybe 4,000 kilometers. We are talking kilometers here, meters. We have a different.
Yeah.
I refuse to obey, right? I just ignore the fear. That's what I'm doing mainly.
Well, you're facing it, right? So
I'm not even facing my fears. I just ignore them all. It's like a silent fight I'm having with my fears. So, and I'm winning every time. That's the main thing for me, that I'm winning all the time, ignoring the fear.
in essence, I mean, you say ignore the fear, but what you're doing is you are facing those fears, right? So, like every time I go climb up something and climb back down, I am facing that fear, right? Every time you pick up a peanut in this instance, or, you drive, outside the city, right? Every time we're doing those things,
Mm,
I go swim in the ocean, right? We're facing the fear. We're not ignoring it, we're acknowledging it. You're acknowledging it exists right now. And that's the part, is we are moving through that fear, right? And anxiety has, a significantly more impactful experience when dealing with fears than, for me, my imagination, or, falling or flying off the side of a cliff, which, gravity wouldn't let that happen. But my body's like, okay, well, maybe it could happen. But if I were to jump, not off of a cliff, but if I were to jump from, let's say there's like a rock here and a rock here, and I were to jump from this one to this one, right, I would be in control of that. I'd be totally fine with that, right?
yeah, yeah.
um, and it comes down to that introspection. Facing that fear comes down to introspection. Why am I reacting this way? What is it about this experience that makes me scared? And how do I move through it? And let's say I've moved through it. Now that I've done that, what did I learn from that experience by facing it? Right. So I encourage people, not if they have an actual peanut allergy, but I encourage people to face their fears and engage with them. And I've always said it, I'm a big proponent of immersion therapy, right? So I don't stop myself from going climbing, cliffs. I was just in Mexico this past summer. I climbed up a cliff, and then it took me a little while to get down. I was wearing not maybe the right boots. And maybe that played into the factor, because I felt like, I couldn't really get a good firm grip hold, and it was just weird. But that felt like I was going to fly off the face of the cliff, but I still went down the cliff. um, Facing those fears, the sense of accomplishment at the end of it is good. And somebody that has, for your case, somebody that has anxiety, the amount of fears that you would have throughout a significant part of your day, right? You may get through all of them, and some of them may affect you differently more than others. Is that an experience that you want to share?
I mean, in my experience, I don't have the same fears every day. Maybe today I'm thinking that the ones that I love are gonna die, and I'm getting crazy with this fear, right? And this one you cannot face, you cannot ignore, you just have to wait and until it passes and maybe read something or do something fun, whatever. When it comes to fears that you can overcome, I'm just doing it and ignore. I prefer to say that I ignore it, because if I say that I'm facing it, I'm giving it, in my mind, I'm giving it too much weight, and I don't want to give them too much weight to those fears. So this is why indifference maybe will hurt the fear, the anxiety a little bit more than facing it, right? But I realized that you're right, we are facing it. I wanted to ask you, what if someone decides not to face their fears? What would happen?
Let's say if I present somebody a choice, right? I present somebody a choice, and they're working with me, right? And
Mm.
or they're a friend of mine. I present them a choice. I say, you can either do this or you can do that, but you can't do both, right? Let's say if they pick, they don't want to face the fear, right?
Right.
Well, at that point, I can't make them face the fear, right? I can do that for myself. I can be like, okay, well, I really don't want to do this, but I'm going to do this, right? But I can't make somebody else face a fear, right? One, that's, inhumane, but two, it's kind of like their choice whether they want to move through it. And I'd like to say succeed in facing the fear, but again, where everyone's at on their own journey and what they deem as their successes is what is different from what I would see as a success for
Yes.
myself.
Yeah.
So they may come across this fear, may not want to engage with it at all, and then turn around. They know that they had a choice at that point in time, right? Now, when they step away from that, they can either forget it, set it aside, and just be like, okay, I didn't face it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I don't want to face it. It's not a big deal, right? Or
Yeah.
they could face it, turn around, and say, man, I wish I would have done that, right? Let's say later on in life, they're facing something different, but the previous experience would have helped them in, the later in life experience.
Mhm.
They didn't face it then, so they have to face it now. And that's what you'll find is that if somebody doesn't face something when it's immediately in front of them, and I'm not saying that's that they have to, but if they don't, if they face it again, they may not be prepared, right? But let's say I'm in the ocean and I have a fear that my imagination is going to create something. I'm going to see something. I'm going to feel something, and it's just going to get blown way out of proportions. Is it grounded in reality? Maybe, maybe not, right? I can work through that on my own terms by going out in the ocean, right? But if I were to be on a boat on a cruise, and then let's say the boat were to have a bed sink, or there's a reason for me to get in a life raft and or whatever, I had to get in the water in an emergency situation. That experience here, now I'm thrown to the grinder. Now, because I'm in that situation unwillingly, it may push me to succeed more because survival instincts will kick
Yeah.
in at that point,
Mm.
right?
Right.
So I did want to touch on like dealing with like narcissistic people, right? So at a time, I dated a covert narcissist, and originally, like everything was fine, went through the stages, and then the post-separation abuse happened, right? And what a narcissist's end goal is to keep you trapped, to break you down, to keep
Mm.
you where they want to keep you, right? That didn't align with who I was. So I was constantly trying to, break out of that box that I was being put in. However, um, I knew the truth, right? Through all the gaslighting, through all of the things that were being thrown at me, the manipulations, the trying to make me stay silent while they're running around telling, false stories, that didn't jive. I had to face the fear of interacting with people that may or may not wanted to hear my story, right? And they can draw their own conclusions, right, from whatever I'm telling, but the fear that I had to face was do I tell them the truth? Right? Do I tell them my experience? Right? Because we talked about in previously, like having people know stuff about me that isn't true. Right? I don't. That doesn't work for me. I don't like it. So I
Yeah.
want to tell them my experience. Right? I have to face that fear,
So
even when they can attack me with it.
you were afraid that they won't listen, right?
Right. I was afraid that they wouldn't believe me, and some didn't. But
Mm,
that's that's I once I've told them the truth, that fear
this,
subsides,
mm,
right? And that sense of okay, I've told them my experience. They don't want to believe me. Okay, right?
yeah.
Um, but the fear of them taking action against me because I was telling the truth
Mm,
was probably one of the biggest fears I've had to face in my entire life, right? And it was used against me in several instances. Me coming to clear my name, to tell my experience, to tell my truth, was then weaponized against me. Didn't stop me from doing it.
let's stop you. And what was the greatest benefit from it for you?
Well, I think it was a double-edged sword because part of that fear, right? It wasn't just that I wanted to tell the truth to these people. It was that if I didn't tell the truth, that they would be walking around with negative image of me. And it's not that I cared about what they thought. It's that they were taking that negativity and using it to affect my life,
Mm,
right? Affect
yeah.
where I could go, affect what I could do, right? I'm still not
Mm,
allowed in certain places because of lies that were told about me.
right.
And that's kind of just an experience, right? And I had to face the fear of and ultimately, right? It comes down to it. I've got the two options, right? I had to face the fear of them knowing something about me that wasn't true and using it against me. But I also had to survive through that entire process. And after that, face the fear of saying it's going to be okay if they don't believe me, right? That was the biggest step, right? So I went from telling them the truth, right? Facing the fear of telling them the truth, telling them my experience, telling them that I survived narcissistic abuse, that I was being abused, right? Emotionally and psychologically. I had to face that. Once I did that, if they didn't believe me, that was the next step. Facing the fear that it was okay that they didn't believe me. I know my experience. I know what I lived through. I know that I lived through a love bomb, devalue, betrayed, discard, a Hoover, post separation abuse, an attempt to destroy my life, my job, my livelihood, and pretty much take everything away from me. I survived that. And I tell my story without fear.
So you having this experience will help you help others, right? In this situation. Because having to do with narcissists, somehow fears are triggered, different kinds of fears. So what would you say to someone who's coming to you, right, for narcissistic abuse recovery and says, I'm afraid of that person. I'm so scared of that person. When I'm seeing him or her, whatever, when I'm hearing about that person, I get really, really scared. What would you tell to a client like this? What are you telling them?
Well, okay, so I definitely do want to take my experience and help people for one, and that's why I do have the narc abuse recovery program. That's why I do offer a support group, and I'm actually integrating with other support uh, networks in my local area. But if somebody comes to me and says, like, I'm afraid of that person, right? Sometimes people that suffer narcissistic abuse become agoraphobic, or when they see that person, they
Yeah,
get that, chemical response in their body. That fear response actually happens because they see that person.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
if somebody comes to me about that, I say, that's totally fine. That is normal. And let's see if we can work towards moving you away from it, right? It may take time, especially when it comes with narcissistic abuse because of the chemical trauma bond, because, the abuse that was there, the cognitive dissonance. It may be hard for a while for that person to not get that fear response. And it's not just a cognitive fear response, it's a biochemical fear
Yeah,
response that they'll be having, right? So I will work with them. And I say it's fine. It's totally normal to be having that, because I don't want them to be judged for having that fear. And I definitely want them to feel supported while they're having that fear. And that fear is warranted. So it's kind of like they've interacted with a predatory, manipulative, exploitative person that abused them mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes physically.
yeah,
How how do we move forward, right? So I'm not going to focus on the trauma and the therapy, but what I will do is I will work with them on facing that fear. And it's not going to be, in that instance, immersion therapy. What it will be is working on themselves, setting goals, setting boundaries, and building themselves up so that way they don't have to fear that person anymore. That fear will subside because they've built themselves back up.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we've talked about facing fears, getting to know ourselves. I've talked about my vulnerabilities and fears, personal experiences, and shared them right here on YouTube. Cornelia has talked about her books. And next week, we are going to have some exciting topics for you guys.